We're doing an open lines program here. I'm about to apparently get Roku in as one of my live streams. So I'm working on expanding the live stream, but I'm particularly pleased to welcome Getter, Gettr, into my live stream. Getter is an amazing site. I'm getting a lot of growth on Getter, so please.
That's why they call it Getter.
Getter, yeah, you bet. It is really cracking, and they're taking on Twitter, which I should mention also carries the show live. By the way, we should give out the number if you'd like to call in. Yesterday I got, I believe, a call. Yes, I did. 617-396-4958. 617-396-4958. Michael D. Shaw is here. He's a science columnist. He writes on Substack. You know, Mike, I think that it's now being not only admitted, but bragged about by the present regime that gas prices are going to be perpetually high. They using the excuse of saying they're going to stay that way as long as the Ukraine war continues, which of course has nothing to do with the price of gas. But I think the real agenda is that the Europeans have been squeezed with high gas prices for the past maybe half a decade, and they're bringing the U.S. up to that level.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it has to do with the World Economic Forum's agenda to transform energy and to green or to wind and solar, and those forms of energy I don't think are quite adequate to fill the gap, and so instead they're just doing it anyways. And also, I think in the broader sense, it's to squeeze small businesses. It's to transfer wealth from the middle class and lower middle class and blue collar to these oligarchies. What do you think?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, the great thing about Marxism is that no matter how many times it fails, the reason that it failed, of course, was because they didn't try hard enough. And it's interesting that France is going back to opening some coal plants because they bought into this BS about green energy, and it doesn't cut it. I mean, and this is nothing new. This is what's pathetic. In the 1970s, they were talking about solar and wind and so on. Even then, people were saying, no, it's not going to work. It doesn't have the sufficient capability to do what we need, but it was always the dream. So what's going to happen? The more they transition to, let's say, electric vehicles, people are very silent about the batteries, the fact that it comes from largely China with a dose of blood minerals from Africa, I might add. So like anything else, it's a destructive policy that's being pursued. Why does anybody listen to the World Economic Forum anyway?
Well, I don't think the World Economic Forum cares whether people listen to them or not. They are, marching forward into the great sunlit future of international world order, leaving in place things like, governments and religions and institutions just for window dressing as they replace them with their actual informal international power. They're talking about eliminating meat. They're talking about eliminating property as an anachronism. Unfortunately, one of the people that seems to be pushing this is none other than Pope Francis, which I don't understand. But it seems to be a collection of the usual criminals on an international level. I mean, both in governments and in the private sector. And this agenda has everything to do with why they had to get rid of Donald Trump. He really stood in the way, literally, of this agenda, but he also posed an existential threat to the agenda because he was waking people up and reminding them of American principles of independence and sovereignty and self-determination and basic human rights.
Well, that's exactly it. It is a bit depressing that the same script comes out every time. Every different iteration, so-called, is the same. People tend to fall for it. Nobody ever learns anything, or it's a very small percentage that do. It's sort of a depressing view of mankind, right? That the same crap works again and again. And you can go back and you can cite how many hundreds of failures, but it doesn't matter because they didn't do it right. We're doing it right. And
I mean, it's the same, it's a criminal mindset that goes back, I mean, at least metaphorically, to the founding parents of all of us, Adam and Eve, who were tempted by the satanic serpent to partake of the fruit of the forbidden fruit, which would have given them all-knowing, conscious awareness of the universe. They would have basically been able to replace God with themselves. It's a man-centered, man-directed world that believes that they have the ability to invent morality, invent reality itself, invent whatever it is, because they're the source of all knowledge. These people are into occultic, elitist, whatever you want to call it, satanic ideas that run contrary to the Judeo-Christian idea, which is that every single human being, every man and woman, is created in the image of God, has natural rights, that has through Jesus, for Christians, it is a personal relationship to God. These are empowering ideas, and they intend to undo those and replace those ideas with themselves, and leave in place some of the trappings so people think they don't know what's going on. I studied a little bit. One of the biggest elitists in this way was Julian Huxley. He was the brother or the cousin of Aldous Huxley, who wrote really the blueprint for all of this, called The Brave New World, who talked about an international human society where everybody's medicated, everybody's on some kind of drug that is mind altering and that is tending to make them docile. But Julian Huxley, who was the founder of UNESCO in 1947, which was billed as the World School Board, which is sort of a center for international propaganda, he talked about the development of evolutionary humanism, which he saw as the new religion after World War II, after he'd been a big supporter of Nazism and eugenics.
yeah, everybody forgets that.
Oh, yeah. Well, the same thing with Klaus Schwab, by the way. His father was directly working for the Nazi nuclear project.
Yeah.
But anyway, Julian wanted to replace all of the world's religions with a humanist philosophy of world collectivism, but yet leave the world's religions infrastructure in place for cosmetic reasons. So you could still go to your church, you could still, have your ritual, and you could have your sacraments, and you could have your bar mitzvahs or whatever it is that your religion does, but the actual beliefs and the philosophy will be switched over carefully to evolutionary humanism. So I think that's what's going on.
Yeah, well, everything you're describing sounds frighteningly similar to Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
And I don't really see why people don't put this together. It's very disturbing. That
it is. I mean, well, the Nazis were portrayed as, quote, right wing by Stalin after Hitler double crossed his socialist ally with a full invasion of Russia and Operation Barbarossa, which took place in 1941. That's making noise. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
That's much better. Oh no, I forgot to shut off my fan. Anyways, what's happening with you, Mike?
Well, the usual stuff. Trying to just a poor country boy trying to make it in a big city.
Somehow I'm losing the sound, Mike. Having all kinds of. Yeah, you have to unmute. Is that
housekeeping there? I'm sorry.
That's okay. Anyways, the other interesting article I read was an interview with Archbishop Vigano. I don't know if you know who he is.
Oh yeah. Oh, definitely. What a hero.
He is great man. He was I think he was the ambassador from the Vatican to the United States, and
right.
He's a guy that doesn't mince words. I mean, he shoots right from the hip. I think he's in his 80s, and he doesn't care what about world opinion. And he gave a very interesting interview to Ben Harnwell, who you can see on Getter,
yes,
and who is a regular on Steve Bannon's War Room Pandemic, which I highly recommend. And he's quoted Vigano as saying that the Ukraine war and the American ratcheting up of kind of jingoistic war involvement has everything to do with covering up the crimes of the Biden family and of Hunter Biden's dirty dealings in Ukraine and in Russia, because let's not forget, he got $3.5 million gift from the wife of the mayor of Moscow. And then he even also included in his comments Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and several other people who he said are up to their necks in corrupt dealings, and that the Ukraine involvement is a way to cover that up. It was why they had to get rid of Trump. Trump was trying to expose it when he contacted Zelensky and asked him to continue investigating it. And that's why they had to try to impeach Trump so they could silence that investigation.
Yeah, that's all true.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I mean, to me, I mean, here's somebody who does know what's going on, and he's putting himself out there to identify it.
Well, he's very well connected, and as you say, he's in his 80s, and especially as a Catholic priest in your 80s, you're looking forward, and you want to die in the best possible state, if you know.
Yeah, that's right. Closest to confession and to God, right?
Yeah, and he was the guy that introduced me to the concept of the Great Reset. That's the first time I had ever heard.
Oh yeah, he's been all over that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So again, people are picking up on this, but on the other hand, it's very difficult with inflation, with gas prices, food shortages, et cetera, et cetera. It's very hard for the average person to sit back and reflect about these major issues when they're trying to keep their heads above water.
Well, these very major issues have everything to do with why Biden was installed.
Yeah.
This is, we look at how this policy has continued on the surface, and we think, this is insane, right? Yeah. This is because Biden is a senile old man who doesn't know what's going on. But the fact is that they are very deliberate. They don't seem to care what people think. Maybe they figure they got elections fixed. I don't know. I'm not saying they do, because we are on YouTube today, by the way. So let's be careful.
Remember also that there's so much emotion and hate involved now that in the latest case of this Cassidy Hutchinson, where everything she said was obviously a lie,
right?
It was pumped up by all these news outlets, although in the case of ABC, they did provide some pushback. But the most depressing part of that whole business was, even after the stuff was debunked, there are people pushing that agenda.
Well, she's a long list of these folk heroes who are willing to step up and take on Trump, and then have promoted her and Liz Cheney, who apparently had primed her to do this, and the guy who was the so-called whistleblower for the perfect phone call, and Robert Mueller and his brown shirts who were pulling Roger Stone out of bed in his pajamas at 3 o'clock in the morning while they had CNN on the front lawn filming, and they were there with a battering ram breaking his door down. His wife is deaf. He's a man in his late 70s. These people are all folk heroes. Rachel Maddow, who was the tin hat conspiracy theorist. Trump is, spying for Russia, and he's, he was installed by Russia. The election was stolen in 2016. She's just another one of the long line. I mean, what is that, Fiona Hill, right? Or that one with the fruit salad, who was that guy? The Ukrainian military man who went up and complained about Trump's foreign policy. I forget his name now. Vindman.
Or something.
Yeah, Vindman.
Yeah. And
meanwhile, his brother's working some kind of a deal to get, really corrupt people. But the point is that they know they're going to get rewarded for this. They're going to get famous. They're going to get a book deal for doing this, for falling on their swords. And they're going to be worshipped because they are taking on Trump, and because, and his entire movement. And she's just another in a long line. It almost could, it's almost like the same words they're using. I heard Michael Beschloss, the court historian, say about her, "My grandchildren will remember this great day when she delivered this testimony."
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I saw that, and
Did you?
I had to read it 2 or 3 times because I couldn't believe the hype. It's almost like what you pour more and more and more hype on this thing, and people are going to believe it more.
I guess, but his comment about his grandchildren reminded me. I remember I listened to the impeachment proceedings over the perfect phone call.
Yeah.
And they ran that live, and each congressman who got up to vote for impeachment said, "My grandchildren are going to remember this vote. This is a moment in world history. This is the biggest thing that's ever happened since Jesus delivered the Sermon on the Mount." It's like, oh my, this is unheard.
Not only is that complete garbage, but the fact is that your grandchildren don't even know significant events, because it is really a bad case now, I think worse than I've ever experienced, of what is that term that I use? I have a fancy word for it that's escaping me now, but it has to do with this ridiculous prejudice people have about their own time, where our own era is superior in every way. We're smarter and we're more enlightened and so on. And therefore, we don't care about what happened a couple of generations ago. And it is really a bad way to look at history. Somehow.
No, somehow they think by smearing and lying about a former president, they're doing something heroic, and that this is going to shake the world.
Yeah.
And, look, I think that the whole thing has fallen apart much more rapidly than the perfect phone call, with that guy, the whistleblower. She's very much the same type. She did not witness anything firsthand. She's talking about alleged conversations she had. She knows nothing.
No.
And now you have, of course, the 2 Secret Service agents who were there and who have served several presidents, including Obama, who have no axe to grind here. They're professionals. They're well respected. They're both willing to testify under oath that she's lying. It's even Rachel Maddow looked embarrassed when she mentioned this. That's a tough one to overcome. Why would they, lie? They're putting their necks out to testify before Congress and possibly, ruin their careers, because it's obviously a lie, and it's embarrassing and disgusting that this committee with Cheney had to have an extra day in order to launch this groundbreaking event that we're finally, after 5 years of crap and conspiracy theory, we're at last going to take Trump down. And they come out with this third-rate, low-level hack, who basically spouts some third-person garbage that would never hold up, certainly in a courtroom. And it showed how utterly false and absurd this committee is. They have no ranking Republicans on it. They've got no minority counsel. It's the first time in history that a congressional committee did not have members of the minority party get to appoint people. So therefore, you have these two hack Republicans, Cheney and that other guy, who basically both of them of whom voted to impeach Trump. They're supposed to be impartial Republicans.
And both of whom are on the way out.
That's right. Exactly. And she's like, oh, the worst.
Oh, well, no, Cheney, Liz Cheney is the worst because she knew that Cassie Hutchinson was lying before she even had her speak.
She recruited her, I think, of what I understand. They pulled her, they lifted some rock somewhere and found her to come up and do this. And then they primed her and prepped her. And yeah, I mean, she is the voice of the old internationalist warmongering establishment of her father and of the Bushes and the Clintons and everyone else. The uniparty, as Steve Bannon so well describes it.
Well, I mean, look at the psychology of this. It's fine. You know where Liz Cheney's coming from, but what about this woman? What kind of a book deal are you going to get?
She's going to get a big fat book deal, is what she's going to get.
When what you say is debunked within minutes.
She knows that she's going to get. I mean, just like Vindman got a book deal, by the way. She's going to get, and Fiona Hill occasionally pops up on CNN and MSNBC. She was a nobody who is now a somebody. Yeah. She knows how powerful this leftist, internationalist, illuminated establishment is, and she's putting her, her lot in with them, knowing that she's going to get rewarded, and she will.
Well,
it's just how corrupt they are. I mean,
I would think that someone like Cassie Hutchinson came into this thing wanting that she chose to be a Republican conservative operative, at least at the beginning, got involved with various political figures, and then just flipped. Maybe that's a job at Mar-a-Lago. That's what Trump thinks.
She's disgruntled. Yeah, could be.
Yeah.
I mean, she did. I mean, if she hated Trump so much, why was she asking for a job?
Yeah, that was the Anita Hill thing. She hated Clarence Thomas so much, she stayed working for him forever, right?
That's right. Got raises and.
Yeah, there's always this common thread that goes through these people. That, well, look, why are you staying there if it's so awful?
Because they got a better deal from someone else. I mean, Anita Hill was getting $10,000 a pop to appear at colleges, and she ended up getting a tenured position at Brandeis. She was a nobody.
Yeah.
She was like a mid-level employee who wasn't really, the brightest bulb in the chandelier. I'm just saying it's personal ambition and greed. Maybe they convince themselves, I don't know, but they can see the fawning, worshipful treatment that they're going to get, and they just can't resist it.
Well, the same thing was really happened with Angela Davis in UCLA. It was the same sort of thing, that she comes out of nowhere, gets recruited. Of course, I mean, that was my era at UCLA when she came around. And of course, the school was always, academia was always left-wing.
Right.
And she was a student of Marcuse. As Trump might say, what a beaut that guy.
Well, the father of the sexual revolution, right? Make love, not war. He coined that.
So that you'd think people would learn after a while, but they never do. That was that famous line in The Black Hole, that Disney movie, before Disney went to hell. Same news, different names,
Yeah, basically. I mean, it's the same story that's cranked out every generation. The totalitarians try to have their stooges, and they give them a few pieces of gold so that they can go out and perform their little act. Perhaps one of the pluses in the firmament, in fact, in a way, I would suggest a major plus, and is the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which I know.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that yet, but yeah. It is interesting how that all happened. I'm not sure what the motivation was. I guess the right case came along with this, what Jackson's Women's Center. And it just wasn't going to stand up. I mean, even Ruth Ginsburg said it was a badly decided case.
Oh, everybody said it, including, and that's why there were all these extremely tough hearings, because judges had to swear loyalty to it, because everybody, even the biggest proponents, acknowledged that it was just a bad law that was manufactured out of thin air. It was not constitutional. It was very questionable, and everyone knew it was vulnerable, and it was so they kept building more walls around it to make sure that it stayed, and it corrupted American politics for 50 years because it was there in broad daylight as something that was a completely unconstitutional seizure of power by the federal government. And it just was corrupt on a lot of levels. Now, the fear-mongering around abortion itself is not well placed, and I think that's why the radicals are not getting much traction, because states are going to decide abortion policy. And look, I mean, I might be a little bit more liberal maybe than you on this issue, in that I understand that abortion has to be legal. I mean, for women who, their life is in danger. And certainly, I mean, I'm not opposed to, early stage, like morning after and that kind of thing. But either way, it's going to be decided by the people. That is the democratic approach. And the left likes to talk about democracy. Well, that's what we're going to get now. We're going to have the states, through their elected representatives, debate these questions and create laws. And I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, it's going to be moderate, because state legislators are usually not radical. They're made up of people from all parts of the state, and they have to compromise. Legislators generally are like that, and I think on the state level more so. So we're not going to have an outright ban of abortion, but we're also not going to have some of these extremist leftist things like performing an abortion even after the baby's been born, right? I mean, which is like being debated in California, and I think, unfortunately, right here in my own state of Massachusetts.
Yeah, well, it was certainly an eye-opening situation for people that had, well, I mean, it's been almost 50 years where this was around, and we'll have to see how it plays out, what the individual states are going to do. But
either way, it's a great victory for the conservative cause, and it's a great victory for moving away from this federalist, internationalist, authoritarian power, and a return of powers back to their rightful owners, the people and the states. Article 9 and 10 of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, specifically say that anything specifically not delineated to the federal government belongs with the states. And that's what this is about. That decision abrogated that, and it's been struck down. So powers have returned to the states and thus to the people. So from a democratic standpoint and from a conservative standpoint, it's a great day.
Yeah, well, you're seeing all the cynical woke corporations coming out saying that we will pay for your travel expenses to an abortion state, but it's for them just a good investment, because let's keep the women working rather than tending to the young folk. No, I've
seen that. In fact, Massachusetts, the Globe just did a big article saying that they think that our state is going to benefit because companies are going to relocate here because we're pro-choice. I don't think that's going to happen. In fact, the opposite's happening. I mean, people are going to Texas. Companies from California are moving to Texas, and from New York are moving to Florida. Now, I think Massachusetts is going to have a good business atmosphere, because when it comes to business and economy, this state is very conservative. We're very pro-business.
Yeah.
But it's not because of our pro-choice.
No, I think what the liberals are finding out real quickly is this is not a major issue for a lot of people. I mean,
yes.
You think about it logically. I mean, why should it be? How many abortions are you going to have in your life? Well,
maybe this might lead to a reduction in people getting unwanted pregnancies. I don't know. I hope. maybe people will think twice about having unprotected sex, right? And realizing that abortion is not birth control. It's not that simple.
Well, who was it? Chelsea Handler was boasting about having 3 abortions when she was in high school.
Boasting?
Boasting, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I heard somebody on NPR here, they had a movement where they want to take the stigma away from abortion. I mean, first of all, I mean, it's a personal thing. I don't know why anybody's advertising this, and that there is a stigma attached. It's a failure. There's a stigma attached to divorce, right? It means that you were in a relationship and it failed for whatever reason. And, when you're going out with someone and you're divorced, you want to tell them that and they look twice at you. I mean, because there is a stigma attached. It means that you had made a decision to enter a marriage and it didn't work. There's a stigma to bankruptcy, right? Especially because you probably screwed a lot of people over. So when you go into business, when you get a loan from a bank, when you're starting a company, the fact that you had a bankruptcy is a stigma and should be, and you should know it. I mean, I see abortion in the same way. A mistake was made. A woman got pregnant. Both a man and woman are responsible, but the woman has to bear the burden because she gets pregnant. I mean, I'll certainly acknowledge that, but the point is that a mistake was made. There was an unwanted pregnancy. That's nothing to be proud of. Now, that doesn't mean that abortion shouldn't be legal at an early stage, but it's not something you run up a flagpole. Hey, I got an abortion. Look at me.
Well, I'm going to form people trying to do that, and the women that boast about this somehow don't seem to realize that stressing how great abortion is may not make you the ideal marriage partner.
Yeah, right. And what about the man? Was he consulted? I mean, there's a movement of men who are upset, that they could have been a father. Yeah. What about, this ridiculous claim by Joy Reid over at MSNBC that this is like part of white supremacy? Excuse me, but I think that the deaths of 20 million Black babies who were aborted since Roe versus Wade by abortionists, if anyone's a white supremacist, it's that.
Well, of course, but when you're talking about Joy Reid, it's like if the hammer is the only tool you have, everything looks like a nail. So her answer to everything is racism.
But this one is completely.
No, I mean, but well, that's fine. But
there's racism and there's racism. I think you could argue better that racism is a policy where you're setting up abortion clinics in Black neighborhoods.
Well,
and
that was exactly what Margaret Sanger wanted to do.
And what she did do, the Negro Project. Yeah. She went in with Rockefeller money and she bribed local Black ministers because she said, well, they don't want to see white people doing this. It doesn't look right. We have to have some Black people doing it. And she did it for entirely racist reasons. She wanted to cull the Black race, what she called the Hispanic race. So, I mean, you want to talk racism, let's bring it on. This is a racist agenda, and it's a eugenics agenda.
Well, it was Charles Hurt who said, I think in today's Washington Times, that this is the most angry he's seen Democrats since their slaves were taken away after the Civil War.
And there you go. Yeah. Exactly. Now, yeah, that about sizes it up. But look, I mean, I do you think it's going to affect the midterms, and if so, how?
Okay, the Democrats seem to think that this is going to be a big issue for them, but I really don't think that's the case, because I don't think it's anywhere near as big an issue as they think it is. People are more concerned with kitchen table issues. Can I afford food and fuel? Can I find baby formula, let's say? Well, abortion would be the answer to that, I suppose. Mm. But they have other things to worry about. As I said, how many abortions are you going to get in your life that this becomes an all-consuming issue?
And also, I think, as usual, the far fringe left wing of the issue has overplayed their hands by pulling such stunts as throwing menstrual blood at people and just really, behaving in a way that doesn't help them, doesn't look great. But going back to the policies we're talking about, and they're policies that, again, I believe are quite deliberate. They, on the surface, look insane. Opening the southern border, letting 1.5 million people, including possible, I think there's been several hundred people on the terror watch list,
Right.
across without any screening at all, not to mention COVID-19. Things like, the inflationary policy of spending trillions of dollars and sending billions to Ukraine to protect their eastern border. These sorts of policies, the gas prices because of the intense regulation of pipelines and the shutting down of the XL pipeline, the baby formula, we could name a bunch of things, critical race theory in the schools, masking children, $1 trillion just spent, I mean, not a trillion, but I don't know how many billions on vaccines for infants and young children. These things are not popular, and they are very deliberate. I think they have everything to do with the Klaus Schwab World Economic Forum agenda to turn the United States into a province of the world. And in that sense, their agenda is successful. They're more successful than Barack Obama was. Barack Obama, they make Barack Obama look like, Winston Churchill. I mean, I don't know. It's way out there on the far left, and yet they don't seem to care.
Well, it's always been a destructive agenda on the left from the beginning. And opening up the border, I mean, this arguably started in the 1960s with the immigration policy crafted partially by your friend Ted Kennedy.
Yes.
Where they decided that they were going to focus on bringing people in from other countries for the obvious reason, although you weren't allowed to think that because that was racist, I guess, that if you get people from the third world, they're not going to be as grounded in the type of ideals that Americans or Western Europeans have about freedom, liberty, all this stuff. And it would be easier to populate the country with these individuals to transform it into a fascist Marxist dictatorship, which actually has been successfully done in Canada, I think, at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And they're trying to, that might be the model for what they're trying to do to the US. But as we've said numerous times on this program, there are 450 million guns in the United States. It's not going to be quite as easy to have that happen. But it's all been destructive, from COVID, from the masking, from the vaccines. And I don't know if your audience has heard the latest deal, that even though there's 100 million doses of vaccine that they can't give away, there's been another government contract for a few $1 billion from Pfizer for the so-called updated version based on Omicron, which in fact doesn't exist anymore. I had said, and it's not original to me, but when this thing first started, there's never been a successful vaccine for a coronavirus, and there never will be, because of the fact that it mutates so readily. That's why there hasn't been a vaccine for the common cold. I mean, that would be the most successful drug of all time if they could do that, but they haven't been able to do it because there's hundreds and hundreds of variants and they're constantly changing. And that's what these coronaviruses do. So yet this contract was let at 56% price increase from last year. So the amount of profits being made by Pfizer and the others is astronomical at a time when the average person is not doing so well.
No, they're making obscene profits, and it's a business. And the problem here, though, is that this is not, they're not just selling, to pet rocks. They're selling something that you inject into someone's body that can have very, very bad effects. And my understanding is that the WHO, I think, or the American, the Food and Drug Administration, they just lowered the standards of testing.
Yes.
to the point where they no longer have to talk about bad side effects. All they have to do is prove that there's an immune response in a very narrow definition. And that's pretty interesting. I mean,
Well,
and by the way, I want to just also make note of the passing of Dr. Zev Zelenko.
yeah.
He was a very incredible pioneer in terms of advocating really early on therapeutics. He is the doctor in New York who developed the hydroxychloroquine Zithromax pack and Z-Pack. And he saved the lives of hundreds of thousands of people in this country and around the world from his therapeutics and his advice on how to ward off virus or reduce its ill effects. He did not die of the virus. He had long-standing cancer. But truly a great man and somebody who was vilified by Fauci and this whole rotten establishment that seeks.
Terrible.
Yeah.
But I mean, let's face it, if they can vilify McCullough, they're going to vilify anybody.
Right.
So,
and so, yeah, despicable.
And of course, Zelensky was frankly more active in treatment. McCullough was also.
Yes.
He was a little more quiet about it until he got challenged. But it's very sad. But it shows you how corrupt this medical establishment is. Very depressing. And
they have blood on their hands. I mean, if they had just promoted therapeutics, which by the way are used around the world, West Africa, there's a reason why the COVID-19 hasn't really made a dent there. It's because people take hydroxychloroquine over the counter regularly. I mean, because they've got viruses and they need treatment to it. India, they have ivermectin regularly. There hasn't been much of a dent in terms of COVID.
No. So it's too bad. I mean, this is the worst public health disaster of all time because we should know better. And we did know better, but it was shut down.
Exactly.
Steve Kirsch actually posted a story about some Harvard guy who has written. I mean, this is very interesting, and even Kirsch didn't really sort of connect all the dots. Kirsch's point was, well, here's this guy. I think his name was Abramson from Harvard, that's written a couple of books on how bad big pharma is. All right, great. And then Kirsch said, well, why is it that he's such a major pro-vax guy? And I had a post that said, well, it's one thing to take the conventional big pharma is evil, which a lot of people agree with, but it's a whole different matter to take on, especially if you're a Harvard medicine professor, that the vax establishment. I don't know how long it's going to be before that falls apart. It will fall apart. It may be another 5-10 years, because then they can look back and say, well, we screwed up. So, not that it was years after the dengue fever vaccine fiasco that killed, it was over a short period of time, 800 kids in the Philippines. And they had to let a certain amount of time go by before they could then publicize that.
Well, that's why Pfizer wanted to have their studies and their tests classified for 75 years.
Right.
And they figured everybody would be dead by the time it came out. And I know I'm putting on the little tin hat here for a second, but I don't think these things are coincidences or accidents. I think there is an agenda here. I look at the Georgia Guidestones and their population control, and I'm sorry to say, I mean, it does make me wonder if this isn't culling the populations of the world.
Well, it's interesting you put it that way, because in the case of thalidomide, they actually thought at first,
right,
that this was a good drug. And the original indication was not for pregnant women.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But when they put it to pregnant women, they still had, I believe, good intentions at first. But then they started ignoring these side effects. These side effects were known.
Oh, and they were horrible. Yeah.
And
And they could no longer be known because they were so visible.
yeah. Well, that was
I mean, they couldn't hide it. Like with the DES, they could hide it for probably a decade or so. But this one was happening right in front of your eyes.
Yeah, I mean, most drugs that go bad start off with good intentions. I mean, heroin was considered to be a miracle drug because it wasn't as habit forming as morphine, which is a true statement, but good grief.
Was heroin synthesized in a laboratory?
Yeah, it was a legitimate drug. I believe it was Bayer
Okay.
that came out with it. And then they saw that because these drugs did not have major clinical trials back in those days, and after it was introduced, they saw there were some issues with it, and it was taken off the market, but then it became a drug of abuse. But there's a host of these drugs that started off with good intentions, but what happened.
Maybe they tried to use them for other purposes, like Ritalin, which started out as a drug for the elderly. Anyways, I want to give out the phone number toward the end here, 617-396-4958. If you'd like to join the conversation, you're welcome to 617-396-4958. Let me also just mention as a program note that next Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, I'll be joined by Paul Manafort.
Oh.
So he's going to talk about what it's like to have been a political prisoner. I mean, and I can't get my hands on his book, though. They're embargoing it. So,
really?
Yeah. I mean, I have enough to ask him about. And I mean, he was basically accused of the same misdemeanors that a lot of people in Washington were involved in, including the one with Clinton. I mean, I forget his name, the pizza and the pedophile pictures. Oh, a Podesta. Yeah. Right. Well, let's not even go there. I'll get in big trouble. But the thing is that he's but he was persecuted because he was supporting Trump. It's that simple. That's his contention, and I believe that's true. So
well, it's too bad how that thing went, but Trump was the guy that was going after the establishment, and as powerful as it was, still was not invulnerable to this sort of attack.
No, I mean, and I think given the attack he was under, he was able to sludge forward and get more done than any president since FDR.
Yeah.
It's an incredible story. And I think he's going to come back. What do you think?
I think it really will depend on what happens with DeSantis. Not that he wants to rival DeSantis, but maybe if you're the age of Donald Trump, who's only a couple of years older than me, you'd be very happy to pass the baton and maybe be in the background. I'm not sure that he needs this hassle again, but on the other hand, they've ticked him off. It may be amusing for a while to still be in the news, even though you're not the president, and all the left-wing networks still spend such amount of time on attacking Trump. But maybe he doesn't need it anymore. I don't know. But
yeah, I mean, it's a big question. You're right. I mean, he doesn't need it. He could retire at Mar-a-Lago and exercise an enormous amount of influence. And it's a tough thing to step back into. I mean, it's the old question of the fire in the belly.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to know. And I hope he does it. And I think he'd win. And I just, but you never know. And maybe he could take DeSantis as a VP. We'll see.
Well, but there's definitely a movement against the establishment Democratic left-wing operatives. The fact that they're propped up by 100% of the media, including Fox now.
Oh, totally, yeah. Uniparty.
Yeah.
Although I think Tucker Carlson is still independent.
So we'll have to see what happens. It is interesting. It's depressing in its own way.
Well, the midterms is coming up only, I think, 3 or 4 months from now. It's July, and that's in the first Tuesday of November. So that's 4 months.
Yeah.
I've heard some left-wing commentators actually say we should abolish the midterms.
Oh,
They
of
should
course.
right? Only should be one election every 4 years. And, we should pack the Supreme Court. I don't think they're going to get away with any of that. I don't think they have the kind of power to do it. Now you have Sinema and Manchin stepping forth and saying they're not going to get rid of the filibuster because they wanted to use that to reinstate Roe versus Wade. Ain't going to happen. There's enough people out there who just aren't going to play ball with that.
No, it's as they call it, the third rail. I mean, who wants to vote on that on a federal level?
Well, they never did it.
The population. I mean, it's
Right.
not a popular issue in the sense that 75% of the people are in favor of it or against it, for that matter.
That's right. And I think that coming up all the way between now and then, the Thomas Supreme Court is going to continue to, I think, issue decisions that will gradually begin the dismantling of what Steve Bannon calls the administrative state.
Yep.
And, that could culminate in a significant victory in November, although they still have in place the same machine that Biden himself described as the greatest vote-stealing machine in modern history. That and who knows what kind of bullcrap they may pull in terms of like a flashy event of some sort.
October surprise.
That's right. October surprise is the term. I wouldn't put anything past them, and it's a very dangerous time.
Indeed.
So Mike, what do you have coming up on your Substack?
Okay, well, I had a couple of articles on the abortion decision, of course.
Yep.
And I followed it up with one of my movie retrospectives. I'm not sure how many of your viewers will remember a movie from 1970 called 5 Easy Pieces, starring Jack Nicholson. In fact, it was the movie that made Jack Nicholson a star.
Mm-hmm.
It was basically about a disaffected man, which of course was very popular in 1970, who came from a fairly cultured, wealthy background, who gets sick of that, starts working in the oil fields in Bakersfield, California, takes up with a waitress from.
Is that the one where he bangs the table? I want the toast with the marmalade.
Yes. And in fact, what I do, and here's an interesting thing, I put a lot of links in these articles. And of course, I get the statistics, how many people clicked on the links. It's a very small percentage, but I link to that particular scene.
It was iconic.
Yeah, it was iconic. And it unfortunately overshadowed other aspects of the movie, which I think were better. But the idea is that he, because his father is dying, he has to go up to the San Juan Islands in Washington State. He ends up taking this girlfriend, which was a mistake. And it's all this interaction between these snobs and this uncultured girlfriend, him trying to make time with his older brother's fiancée, played by Susan Anspach, who essentially played herself, this whiny, entitled, that's a whole other story, but it has a very interesting ending. And I always liked that movie, but anybody that grew up in that era tended to identify with being this disaffected soul. You were alienated from whatever it was. And Jack Nicholson played it perfectly, but every role was cast perfect.
Well, it captured the zeitgeist of the times. Yeah, I'll have to check it out. Absolutely. I want to revisit that. I'll check it out.
It'll describe it, and you can find the movie on YouTube. I think you have to pay a few dollars to see it. Other sources for it, but it just I wanted to do something other than write about current politics. So
No, you're doing some great movie reviews and, doing some culture commentary. It's great. Really good stuff.
yeah. Well, it is fun, but I try to mix it up because the trouble with writing columns like this is you don't want to be a one-trick pony.
Right.
As good as Steve Kirsch is, do you want to write about how bad the vaccines are? 10,000 articles. I mean, that's his thing, and all right, but I try to mix it up.
Yeah, you bet. And how do people get to the Substack?
All right, it's called Mike's Point of View, so it's mdspov.substack.com.
Okay. All right, Mike. Listen, as always, thanks for joining me. Hope you have a good week.
And here we are in July.
Hot as hell up here.
Now, what about fireworks in Boston? What are you going to do about that?
It's a great day in Boston. They're doing all of it, and I'm going to be out of town, but I'm going to be in New York with my wife's family. But
okay.
It's a great time to be in this city. Great concert. I've gone to it many times.
Well, enjoy yourself in New York.
Thank you.
And we will do this next week.
You bet. All right, Mike. Take care.